start dragging her from the driveway carport into the house. And as that happens, Kathy is telling her son, Colin, stop, let go, let go. Let go of me, you're hurting me. And that's the last that those two neighbors saw of Kathy Griffith. That's the last anyone would see of Kathy Griffith alive. You're going to have an opportunity to see crime scene footage and crime scene video. And you're going to see that the violence continued and started on that day when the defendant grabbed his mom by the hair and dragged her into the house as she was saying, let me go, Colin, you're hurting me. You're going to hear and see that this mom was doing nothing violent or physical to her son, who she took care of and loved. But the defendant thought it was all right to grab his mom by the hair and yank her into the house. Well, what happened on the way to the house? Kathy, one of her AirPods falls out. It falls in the mulch. The defendant drags her into the house, infuriated. Another EarPod falls out of her other ear. You're going to see photos that Kathy would wear AirPods a lot to talk on the phone, listen to music. You're going to hear as he dragged her and was furious, you're going to see her AirPod case falls in the living room as he continues to drag her to the back of the house, letting his anger and rage come out. You're going to see the crime scene of that brutal, vicious, savage killing that I mentioned at the beginning of the opening statement. You're going to see pictures of Kathy who came out of her flip-flops as the defendant was attacking her. You're going to see photographs of a charger that is strewn about on the floor from when the defendant was attacking her. You're going to see that same brown leather backpack/purse that was over her shoulder when the defendant was attacking her came crashing to the ground. And you're going to see that it's got blood all over the place. That when he stabbed her, she was still holding it. There's blood on the outside. There's blood on the inside. There's blood on the front, on the back, on the wallet. And you will see firsthand the carnage that Kathy suffered as she laid in the pool of blood that came out of that deep gash in her neck, compliments of her son, Collin Griffith. When all the evidence is in, ladies and gentlemen, you should come to one conclusion. That being that the just verdict is holding the defendant responsible to what he chose to do on September 8th of 2024. And that just verdict, based upon the evidence that you will see and hear, is that you find the defendant guilty of both first-degree murder and kidnapping for the crimes that he perpetrated on his own mother. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Levine. Does the defense wish to give an opening statement? You may proceed, Ms. Thornhill.
Good morning. You're probably expecting me to say something very different from what Mr. Levine presented, and you'd be right. I'm going to start by introducing some of the people that are a part of this family and whom you will hear from. You've heard some of their names already, but I think it's helpful if you know the relationships among them. So first we have Collin Griffith. Obviously you are aware of him. He's 17 years old. Catherine, or Kathy as she's known, Kathy Griffith, is Colin's mom. And tragically and sadly, she is no longer with us. Susan Detman is the third main person who is involved in this saga. Susan Detman is Kathy's mom and Colin's grandmother. Christopher Griffith is Colin's older brother, so son of Kathy and of Charles Griffith, who goes by Chuck sometimes. He was born when Kathy was very, very young. She got pregnant when she was 13. She gave birth at 14. Colin came along a few years later. You've already heard about Robert Willantis. He is Kathy's father and Colin's grandfather. You heard that he lives in New Mexico, and he has for many years. He's sort of removed from the family a little bit. Some other names you may hear are Christy Rooney, who is Kathy's older sister, oldest child of Susan and Chuck. John Paul Willantis, who is the younger brother of Kathy, also the child of Susan and Robert Willantis. Susan is now Detman. Finally, there is Nicky Markovich, who is now Susan's husband, and Kevin Markovich, who is the son of Susan and Nicky, so the half-brother of Kathy and the half-uncle to Colin. Okay? I should have drawn a family tree, but at any rate, this family, like a lot of families, at times is very close and at times has its issues. You'll hear about these cruises that multiple family members took together, but you'll also hear about estrangements and fights. The common denominator in the estrangements and fights, Kathy Griffith. She is the person who is periodically, or for really long periods of time, estranged from any number of those people that I have mentioned. You heard that she lived separate from Colin for many years. That was after her divorce from Charles Griffith. With Susan, the other main player, who you'll hear from, it depended not on the year or the month, depended on the day and sometimes even the minute, whether Kathy was communicating with Susan or whether she was telling Susan she never wanted to hear from her again and that she was dead to Susan, or that Susan was dead to her. Susan was a regular part of Kathy's life because she lived in Florida and close in Florida. Susan periodically stayed in Charlotte County. You heard about some of her other homes. She travels quite a bit, some for work, but for a variety of reasons. But she is the constant in Kathy's life. Always there when Kathy needs something, especially money. Some of the things you heard about that Kathy provided for Colin, according to Mr. Levine, were actually provided by Susan. Susan paid for every single trip they took, and that Kathy chose to take. Susan would pay Kathy's phone bill sometimes. At any rate, Susan was the constant. She will tell you about Kathy's personality. She'll tell you about her mental health problems. She'll tell you about Kathy's drinking and misuse of pills. She will tell you about Kathy's threats to commit suicide over the years, but not just threats. She will also tell you about the several attempts Kathy made on her own life. Beyond that, you're going to hear that Kathy not only wanted to cause harm to her own self, but Kathy has threatened or done harm to other people. You'll hear some of those details about some of the things that she actually did to another person in front of Colin, involving weapons. You will hear that she has threatened to kill different people at different times and actually taken steps towards completing that wish. You also hear that Kathy is not exactly reliable in what she says. You'll hear this from her own mother, that she makes things up, that she is unpredictable, she is erratic, and goes into rages. As I said before, Kathy has been, or was still estranged from multiple family members at the time of her death. I won't go into the details now, but you will hear about some of those details as well. So let's go back to September of 2023, now that I've sort of laid the scene. The family went on a cruise in September of 2023. Susan paid for it. It was Susan and Kathy and Colin and Kevin, and I'm not sure if anybody else went or not. Kathy got upset on that cruise. You'll hear that Kathy, according to her own mother, if somebody doesn't do something that she expects them to do, she gets very angry. And in this particular situation, Kevin and his girlfriend was also on the cruise. Were supposed to meet her at 8 o'clock to go to some activity on the cruise. And apparently Kevin and his girlfriend were late, and Kathy got really upset and started saying that they had lied to her and that she was done with them, and she ended up getting her own room for the last night or two of the cruise to be separated from everybody else. You'll hear that as Kathy and Colin were driving home from the cruise, and Kathy's already mad, at least according to Susan, that Kathy was also upset with Colin. You'll hear a variety of things about why she was upset with Colin. You'll hear that she claimed that he was failing a class, and that's why she was mad at him. He wasn't ever failing a class. Every single screenshot on the phone records that show his grades show A's and a B or two. Colin graduated early from high school with college credit. He was not failing. You may hear that Kathy was upset with Colin because he had an appointment set up with, he was dual enrolled too. So he had, high school teachers, but also college professors. She got upset that he said, "Oh, I have an appointment with one of my teachers or professors," and she was mad that she hadn't been told that in advance. There was a disagreement. So either on the way home or when they get home, you'll hear that Colin told this to police later, by the way, that my mom handed me an envelope and said, "Here are all the important papers you'll need if I'm gone." Then they are inside the house, and Kathy got her gun. The gun that she has owned and lied about whether she had it in her house or not at a variety of times, and pointed it at her son and said that she was going to either shoot him or herself or both. And then she handed the gun to Colin and said, "Just shoot me." She's ordering him around the house. At one point sends him outside and says, "When you hear the pop, you can come back in." Makes him sit down outside her bedroom, cross-legged. When he didn't want to sit cross-legged, she said, "You're going to sit cross-legged," with the gun pointed at him, while she sits on the bed. At some point, Kathy, I guess, decided not to go through with whatever her plan was. And in her erratic and unpredictable way, she put the gun away and drove Colin to school. So Colin goes straight to his teacher and says, "My mom just pulled a gun on me. She threatened to kill me. She threatened to kill herself. I'm scared." So the teacher immediately goes to the school resource officer, and they get the Charlotte County Sheriff's Office involved. Colin repeats to multiple people, his teacher, the SRO, the sheriff's officer, deputy that comes. And they did send someone to Kathy's house because they were doing this investigation, and Kathy won't open the door. She didn't want to speak to the officers. Eventually, they convinced her to speak with them. She said she'd had bad experiences with law enforcement in the past. She finally says, "That never happened. Colin's just making it up because he's upset that he was failing a class, and I took away his phone and his AirPods because he's failing a class." Okay, so divergent stories, right? Sheriff's deputies go back to Colin at the school and say, "Your mom says this never happened. She says you're just mad at her and made the whole thing up." And Colin is like, "No, it happened. This is what she did to me. She has a gun in the house." They didn't believe him. They believed Kathy. So, when he repeats, now to DCF staff members who are investigating, and he tells all of these details too, and the DCF worker has access to all of the prior DCF reports that exist from Florida that uniformly talk about Kathy being violent with others, Kathy not being protective of her children, Kathy threatening to or committing violence on other people. Despite all that, they believed Kathy. Colin repeated again and again, "I am scared to be with my mom. If she does something to me again, like pull a gun on me, if she attacks me, I will defend myself, and I may hurt her." So they put Colin in a Baker Act facility for those statements. Interestingly, Kathy, rather than being relieved that her son, who allegedly threatened to kill her, is in a safe place, does everything she can to not cooperate with the people in the Baker Act facility, the sheriff's deputies, DCF. They insist, because of what happened in Oklahoma, and because of what he said his mom had done to him, and because he said, "I don't feel safe going home because I'm afraid of what she might do to me again and what I will do in response," that he was safest in this facility. Kathy won't sign medical release forms so they can get more information about the family. She won't approve any medication for Colin. And then she hires a lawyer to get him released from the facility against all advice. when they were getting ready to release him to Kathy, he says, "Do not send me home with my mom. I am scared. She threatened me. If she comes at me, I'm going to defend myself." So they put him back in the Baker Act facility. By the way, they find out she does have a gun. Like, she owns the gun. Colin tells DCF, "I would rather go into foster care than go back with my mom." Because he didn't feel safe with her. Eventually, after you heard about the special unit from Charlotte County Sheriff's Office that got involved with the family, this is when they get involved. And you'll hear about either Corporal or Detective Rentis, he's a male, and Detective Lacey Zanoniani. A lot of times she's referred to as Lacey or Detective Z. But they start getting involved with the family. They're making suggestions to Kathy about how to handle this situation, and she is fighting against them in any way she can. She eventually Kathy tells Detective Zanoniani that Colin is going to this place called Sandy Pines, and he's going to be there from between 60 and 90 days. They're going to work on a treatment plan for the trauma he has suffered, for these statements he's made. But after 3 days, Kathy checks him out of Sandy Pines against medical advice. There's a family meeting where Kathy admits to pulling a gun on Colin. But everybody in the family says, nope, Colin's going home with Mom, because Mom was insisting on it. It's her way or the highway. So that happened in September of 2023. Next you'll hear is about the November 2023 incident where Colin ended up getting arrested. What you'll hear is, once again, diverging stories about what happened. On November 12th of 2023, Colin called the sheriff's office. He may have even called Corporal Rentis. Okay, so he is reaching out. He is being forthcoming. He says, my mom and I had a verbal argument. I left the house because I'm scared. She told me that I should just pack my bags and go. But then you'll hear this happens over and over. It's a theme. She will kick him out, but then she'll claim he's a runaway and he must come back. Inconsistent. So he called Rentis and says, I don't feel safe at home because my mom still has her gun and because she's threatened me before, and now we're fighting. We're arguing. That night, on November 12th, the deputies decide that it's best if Colin go with Susan, his grandmother, be separate from his mom, which I think you'll hear from the sheriff's deputies is kind of what they think would be best for everyone, is to just not have Colin and his mom living together. But Kathy is insistent that he continue to live with her, despite her knowing what he has said. And remember, he has said, if she attacks me, I will defend myself. If she threatens me, I'm afraid of what might happen. So, Susan picks Colin up on November 12th. She brings him to Auburndale, which is she teaches, and her in-person teaching job is here in Polk County. So that is her main residence, is Polk County. But that's a 55 and older community. You're not supposed to have kids there for very long. You've got Kathy yelling, demanding that Susan bring her son back. You can't steal him from me, even though this is a resolution to the argument that Colin and Kathy had, and that Colin is saying he doesn't feel safe with his mom. At any rate, next day, Susan, who is a trooper, brings Colin back to his mom. Best decision? Probably not, but I don't think you can ever know what other people are going through when you're not going through it yourself. So she brings him back to Kathy, and they're all together in the home. And Susan will tell you quite honestly that she doesn't remember if it was this day or another day, because there were many days like this where she took Colin, and then Kathy insisted she bring him back, and then Kathy would go on a tirade against Colin when he came back. It may have happened this day, it may have happened another day, but Susan will tell you that Kathy punished Colin, because even though sheriff's deputies had mediated this, Susan's going to take him for the night, let everybody cool down, that when Kathy started insisting that Colin come back to her, and he's 16, doesn't have a driver's license, doesn't have a car at this point, and he's with his grandmother. And apparently, grandmother, Susan, didn't bring him back quickly enough to Kathy's liking, but Kathy punishes Colin. Susan will tell you she saw Kathy make him do a whole bunch of push-ups and holding weights above his head, and then she whipped him with a belt in front of Susan. And Susan said, "Whoa, whoa, whoa. That's going too far." And Kathy says, "No, it's not, because Corporal Rentis said I can discipline him any way I want." Which isn't true, by the way, but. So Susan, the walking on eggshells that she has done for years with Kathy, can't do much about it, she feels. Later that same day as they're eating, Kathy is, these are Susan's words, reading Colin the Riot Act about this is how it's going to be. This is what you're going to do. You have to listen to everything I say because Corporal Rentis says it's okay. Susan thought she was being way too harsh. And I realize parents differ in how they treat kids. That's fine. And Colin did stand up and say, "Let's just do this." Now, Colin told the police, because they did get involved, and this is when he got arrested, that his mom kept telling him to shut up, and he wouldn't shut up. And you'll see some examples of that on the Ring video. Colin would talk back. Best decision? Obviously not. But he says that when he wouldn't shut up, his mom hit him in the face, punched him in the face. So he grabbed her and did a wrestling move where he basically flung her to the ground. He fully admits that. He says that while he was doing that, he kneed her in the stomach. Okay? He never denied doing that. At any rate, Susan says when he stood up and said, "Let's do this," she went to get her phone to call Rentis to try and mediate, and next thing she knew, they were both on the ground. She didn't see Kathy punch him, but she also said it's entirely possible it happened based on her knowledge of her daughter and how she behaves. So, after she's on the ground, they're both on the ground, Colin gets up and leaves the house. Calls the police. That's how the police get involved. Colin called them. And you'll see some of the Ring video, or not Ring video, body-worn camera footage from that night, with Colin talking to the officers, being very forthcoming. The officers spend a lot of time talking to all three people. Colin ends up getting arrested for domestic violence battery. Kathy denies she ever put her hands on him. He is put in jail that night. And the next morning, when he's getting ready to be released from the juvenile detention center, they say, okay, get in the car with your mom, because mom's there to pick him up. And Colin says, don't make me get in the car with her. If she attacks me, I'm afraid of what will happen. If she comes at me again, I'm going to defend myself. The law enforcement officer at the juvenile jail basically says, I don't like your attitude, get in the car with your mom. So Colin gets in the car with his mom, goes home, and she immediately starts making him do standing marches with weights above his head. And you'll see that on body-worn camera footage, because while the personnel at the jail forced Colin to get in the car with his mom, even though he said he didn't feel safe with her, they did call the sheriff's office and say, by the way, I had a kid that said he might kill his mom, which is not what happened. Well, I wasn't concerned enough about it to not let him get in the car with his mom, but I'm calling you. Can you guys go check? So all these sheriff's deputies troop up to the house. Kathy opens the door, come in, and you see Colin doing this with weights above his head, and the officers separate them and speak with each one. Kathy's saying, he beat the shit out of me last night. This is his form of discipline. He's been doing it since he got home from the jail. Colin is outside talking to the detectives, once again, being very forthcoming. He says, my mom thinks I'm going to hurt her, or that I want to hurt her. I don't want to hurt her, but if she comes at me, I'm going to defend myself. Guess what happened that day? Colin gets Baker acted again. So, Colin's back in a psychiatric facility for the statements that he made about, I don't feel safe with my mom. If she comes at me, I'm afraid I'll do her harm. Meanwhile, Kathy is calling Corporal Rentis and Detective Zanoniani, all upset that Colin got taken away from her. And then she starts making suicidal statements to them. So they send other deputies to the house, and Kathy gets Baker acted for threatening suicide. So, all is not well at home, clearly. After Colin was arrested for domestic violence battery, Susan, his grandmother, hired him a lawyer named Jeff Rapkin down in Charlotte County to represent him in those criminal charges. Kathy is back and forth about what she wants to happen. Sometimes she wants the charges dropped. Sometimes she wants Colin to get diversion. Sometimes she wants him to, get the book thrown at him. Jeff Rapkin realizes that this is not a good situation. So he crafted what's called a 751 agreement. And this is an agreement between Kathy and Susan that allows for concurrent custody of Colin. And you'll see the legal paperwork. It was signed and notarized by Kathy and Susan and Mr. Rapkin. It was filed with the courts. The court ordered this concurrent custody agreement, meaning that Colin could be with either Susan or Kathy. Each one of them could make medical decisions for him. Each one of them could enroll him in school, that they had equal authority over Colin. And the idea was to kind of give everybody a break and respite. Kathy sometimes misinterprets that concurrent custody agreement. You'll see in some of her text messages or hear her on Ring video leaving messages for other people or talking to them. the agreement says that you can only have him if I'm mentally incapable of taking care of him or if I'm physically incapacitated, which is not true. You'll see the paperwork. At any rate, she has this very ambivalent, is a very tame term, very ambivalent feelings about whether Colin should be with her or not with her. And over the next few months, so December 2023 into the first few months of 2024, there is a lot of back and forth, meaning Colin goes between Susan and his mom. Meanwhile, he's still going to school and everything and keeping up his grades. You'll hear from Susan that Kathy would alternately kick him out again, say, get out of here, I don't want you here anymore, and then demand that he come back, even when he didn't want to. Several calls over the months from a variety of people, from Susan, from other family members, from Jeff Rapkin, saying that Kathy is suicidal. She has a gun in the house. She's threatened to kill herself. She actually does overdose a time or two. So that's what's going on in those months. In February, and it's going to be unclear exactly how all this occurs, but DCF gets involved again. Colin repeats that he doesn't feel safe at home with his mother. This is, after the suicide attempts and Baker acts for Kathy. He tells them, I'd rather be in DCF custody, I'd rather be in foster care, I'd rather be anywhere but at home with mom. I'm scared.
Okay, step around.
Just watch your step going up. Just sit in the chair. Good morning.
Good morning.
Next, please.
All right, thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, ma'am. May you please introduce yourself to the jury and spell your name for the record?
My name is Laura Ellis, Loraellis.
And where are you employed?
Not have it. Detective Zanoniani is saying, all these people have intervened and tried to come up with a solution. Kathy will not have it. Somehow, Colin ends up back with mom, but because he doesn't feel safe, he runs away again, telling everybody, I don't feel safe. Law enforcement gets involved again. They find a gun in the home, which Kathy had lied to them about and said, oh no, I gave it to somebody else for safekeeping. Oh no, there's a gun there. She also claims that Colin attacked her again to law enforcement. She said, he was trying to run away and he battered me. So the sheriff's deputies look at her ring video and they're like, there was no battery. She tried to step in front of him and block him from leaving, escaping the situation, and may have brushed by her. That's what she was calling a battery and trying to get him arrested. But then she would have probably demanded that he come back home with her. Needless to say, much chaos. In March, in what I hope is a little bit of positive news in all of this, Colin gets his driver's license and he gets a job at Domino's. And he did get a car. Kathy didn't buy him the car like she wants everybody to believe. It came from a trust that existed separate from Kathy. He's still going back and forth between Susan and Kathy, managing to accomplish things as a 17-year-old, 16, then 17-year-old. And then we get to the end of August, beginning of September of 2024. And you'll see a text from Kathy in the end of August saying to her mom and to other people, "I'm going into that dark place again. My therapist thinks I should go to a facility for at least a few days," but she doesn't. September 7th, you heard about the whole bookshelf thing. There was, in fact, an argument over whether Colin would help her put up a bookshelf. And he